Good morning. Please take your seats and ensure your mobile phones are turned to silent. The memorial will begin shortly. At the conclusion of today's memorial, the Polson family invite all guests to join them for light refreshments in the foyer on the ground floor. The New South Wales Government acknowledges the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of this land where we gather for today's memorial. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people joining us in person and online.
Good morning. My name is Louise Duff. It is my privilege and honour to be asked to welcome you here today to celebrate the life of David Polson AM. In order that we might pay David the respect that he rightfully deserves, would you be kind enough to ensure your mobile phones are silenced? Not all of us will be so considered as to have chosen the music that will provide the background for a snapshot of our life, but David did. All of the music you will hear today was chosen by David and specified in his will. from the Chopin you heard on arrival, to the overture from La Traviata, and the musical treat that is the magnificent voice of Australian Italian soprano Clarissa Sparta. If in our life we are gifted the responsibility to reflect on the life of another, we might be forced to consider that which we have contributed, what mark we might leave, the impact of the life that we have had. By almost all measures, our mark will fall short of that of David Polson, because whatever you think you have contributed, it will undoubtedly pale in comparison. I think the measure of a life is what you have given without expectation of a response. In fact, not about how much you give or what you think your contribution is, but the impact you make when you are going about your days in pursuit of what you think is right. And if you are lucky, your life will provide unexpected gifts, and David was that for me. A state memorial is the highest possible honour offered in the state of New South Wales, and today we are gathered here to honour the memory of David Polson. Many of you will know of this remarkable individual, known for his resilience, his advocacy, and his contributions to the LGBTQIA+ community and HIV and AIDS awareness. A man of indefatigable spirit who participated in 28 drug trials over 40 years, significantly advancing medical research and treatment options across not only HIV and AIDS, but immunology and epidemiology, contributing to better outcomes for patients challenged by cancer, by diabetes, and even our response to COVID. A passionate advocate for reducing the stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS, who believed in the power of open conversation to dispel myths and to foster community. Whose warmth, humour, and unwavering optimism left an indelible mark on those who knew him, and whose legacy continues to inspire and to educate. On behalf of David's sister Ruth Henning, her husband Evan, her children William and Edward, I warmly acknowledge Brigadier Robert Lording, representing the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, Her Excellency, the Honourable Margaret Beazley, Governor of New South Wales, and Mr Dennis Wilson, the Honourable Chris Minns, Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Minister for the Environment and Water, Federal Minister for Sydney, representing the Prime Minister of Australia, New South Wales and federal parliamentarians, former New South Wales Premier, the Honourable Barry Unsworth, and the City of Sydney councillors. It's appropriate that today's state memorial is being held in this beautiful venue, the City Recital Hall, a place where David was a frequent ticket holder, celebrating the music he loved so much. David loved this city, particularly his neck of the woods, and those streets and pavements bear witness to the footfall of his life and the friendships he earned. To commence today's proceedings, I invite David's cousin, Cecily Polson, to recite the beautiful poem, He Is Gone.
You can shed tears that he has gone, or smile that he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he'll come back, or you can open them and see all that he has left. You can have an empty heart because you can't see him, or it can be full of the love you've shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can be sorry that he's gone because you can't see him, or you can cherish his memory and let it live on. You can close your eyes, cry, be empty, turn your back, or do what he'd want. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on.
Thank you, Cecily. If you knew David, then you knew his effervescent, ever-patient and ever-present friend, Peter Campbell. Their friendship has spanned more than 3 decades, and it took them from the theatre to the vet, chicken sandwich-filled afternoon teas, 5 p.m. cocktails on the balcony, and weekly breakfasts around the hood, to lively dinners with David's circle of dear friends. Please enjoy these special insights from Peter Campbell.
David, what have you done? Hello. I'm David's Madge Alsop, with a little bit of Alice B. Toklas thrown in. This is, believe it or not, a good news story. David John Polson, AM, Emeritus Founding Chair of Qtopia, Sydney, aka Lord Polson, Lady Hargraves, Polly, Love, even an occasional Edna Everidge or Celeste Patterson. Sometimes more than an occasional. David was an enigmatic amalgamation of paradoxes, an atheist who would have been thrilled by the moving tribute he received in the Catholic Weekly. And he lived 80 years and 3, well, you know, the biblical number. Politically centre-left, he would have been overjoyed that his death was announced so beautifully and promptly in a Daily Telegraph obituary. And a gay man who died in the arms of 2 heterosexual women he adored, his sister Ruth and great friend Amanda, not to mention his loving cavoodle, Rosie, who I believe might also be straight. In February last year, at the official opening of Qtopia, David gave a great speech, starting with, in a very booming voice, "I should be dead." Well, David, now you are. But he wouldn't want me to hide his death behind a euphemism, because for David, why use a euphemism when an expletive could do? He even gave me the opening line for this obituary 20 years ago, and I'm not going to say it. But you can guess. He hasn't passed or passed on, he died, and he damn well shouldn't have. We silly humans again find ourselves in crazy and anxious times, so we need more David Polsons, not fewer. Look around you at the diversity of people here today who've come to honour and celebrate him, from all walks of life and in large numbers. What have we in common? Well, we were drawn into him and to his life. Since his death, so many people have told me he changed their lives, sometimes in surprising ways. Now, he certainly wasn't the second coming. Even David, with his robust ego, which was intact right up to the end, would agree. But he was confident and charming and wicked and naughty and generous to a fault. I was trying to think of one word to describe him, and it dawned on me that that word is simply host. He made everyone welcome. Even in your own home, if you had him for dinner, you were relegated to the kitchen and he became the host. It's true, you did. He was difficult to say no to, and that's a gift. That's how he got things done. David maintained he absolutely knew as a small child in New Zealand that he was different, and that was confirmed by stock standard off-the-rack cretinous school bullies who labelled him a puff or a faggot. But he didn't hide in a closet. Instead, he resolved he would be himself. In 1972, as a 17-year-old, he had a small role in a professional stage production of Henry V in Christchurch, working with a fellow New Zealander with an established acting career in the UK, Jonathan Elson. Jono was here today, and it was he who introduced me to David some 20 years later in Sydney. Mixed blessings there, Jonathan, thank you. This city became the centre of David's universe. In a way, it was both his undoing and the scene of his salvation and triumphs. He moved from acting into hospitality in Sydney, which he obviously was born to do, hence the host. He became a noted head waiter, maitre d', a restaurant manager in different parts of Australia and in London. But the role he loved most was that of manager of the exclusive Don Burrows Supper Club at the Regent Hotel in George Street. There are so many stories about his time there that I don't have time to go into now, but I do know that even before I met David officially, I was not welcome to the Don Burrows Supper Club because I wasn't dressed correctly. And as I recall, it was David who told me I couldn't come in. Now, most of you know, of course, about the HIV diagnosis in '84 and the drug trials. He hit rock bottom during some of those trials, but rarely complained. He nearly died several times. And the worst thing, I think, is while he was suffering, he watched many friends dying, including HIV researchers, a few doctors and nurses. But he pulled through time and time and time again, only to be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease a couple of years ago. Now, that really did piss him off. Apologies for the... But he thought he was lucky because so many others died in the 80s and 90s, and he didn't. He became a fixture at St Vincent's Hospital in Darlinghurst for about 40 years. He respected and loved Sister Claire and the other wonderful sisters of charity who cared for him and many hundreds of HIV/AIDS patients. Those women were pioneers, and David robustly championed their work, constantly reminding the queer community of their pivotal place in our history. David would also want me to extend his very deep gratitude to the late Professor David Cooper. Their special relationship during a time of crisis was so important to David, and even led to the creation of Qtopia Sydney. When and even before David could no longer work in paid employment because of the effects of the drugs and also HIV, he threw himself instead into mostly unpaid HIV/AIDS advocacy work as an educator, motivational speaker, fundraiser, lobbyist, and nuisance. But what you may not know is that most of the work David did that earned him his Order of Australia, and this marvellous state memorial and other accolades, was done by a man who lived on the smell of an oily rag. He may have had the energy of 10 wind farms, a patrician air and champagne tastes, but he existed on a disability pension and occasional help from a few dear friends and close family. He lived in social housing and more or less stuck to a very tight budget. He was addicted to shopping. But as a functioning, valuable, in fact priceless member of our community, David was an absolute bargain. Some of the drugs and combined therapies that David trialled are now used to fight all sorts of conditions that Lou's mentioned. It seemed to me that when David was at his lowest, he became stronger. When challenges kept hitting him, he hit back. The wonderful gay writer James Baldwin said, "Walk down the street of any city and look around you. What you've got to remember is what you're looking at is also you." Well, David Polson didn't walk past anybody. He embraced everybody. He could talk to and mix with anyone. Each of us felt we had a unique bond with him. That's because he was naturally empathetic. He knew that LGBTQIA+ does not spell woke. It's a formula for hope, humanity, and unity. We're all parts of one or more minorities in a puzzle that makes up a mature, open, interesting, and above all, civilised society. And we should question the motives of those who want to divide us or deny us the basic right to live as ourselves, without harm to anyone else. That's what David firmly believed and practiced every day. He proved that seemingly irresistible forces can be resisted and conquered, whether it be HIV/AIDS or prejudice. Not content with all his other projects and personal challenges over the last few years, David recently also collaborated with filmmaker David O'Brien to produce a series of important and very personal documentaries about the AIDS crisis of the 1980s and St Vincent's Ward 17 South, the AIDS ward. I've seen some of the footage and it's really moving. The project had seed funding from Qtopia Sydney, but it needs extra money to get to completion. I'd be happy to point you in David O'Brien's direction if you're able to help. He's here today. So we get to 2025 and the story shifts. David's room in St Vincent's palliative care unit became, for a few days in February, a small recreation of Ward 17 South. Friends popped in and he was surrounded by aria after aria after aria sung by Maria Callas, with a little Mozart for respite for the rest of us. Dear Rosie stayed with him 24/7, licking his face constantly, and he enjoyed a few G&Ts and Veuve Clicquot, usually just on a mouth sponge. But only the day before he died, at about 6 in the morning when a nurse was looking after him, he asked her very clearly for a gin and tonic in a glass. David would want you to remember him in your heart, but more than that, he'd rather be there with you in your mind, urging you onwards and upwards to do something, to make something, and to live. And that's why this has been a good news story. David lived long enough to enjoy tributes, to be fussed over and loved and laughed about, and to bequeath a legacy, which is more than the stock standard off-the-rack cretinous bullies I mentioned earlier will ever do. David Polson, your life meant something. You will be delivered, you'll be delivered, my God, you'll be remembered and treasured. On a personal note, bon voyage, love. May there be clearer skies for you and gentler seas. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete, for those very moving memories. Tom Woods today is a Sydney barrister, but he and his younger sister Sylvie were both in primary school when David came into the lives of their family. Often looking after them in Potts Point, where their busy parents Amanda Finlay and Greg Woods worked, to Tom, David was a brilliant, flamboyant and caring custodian, tutor and educator. This is another side of David's life. Tom.
It's an honour to be asked to speak on this occasion about David Polson, one of the most special people I have ever met and will ever meet. David was a very close and trusted friend of my family. When my sister Sylvie and I were in primary school, we became David's charges. He looked after us when our busy parents were working, and we loved him. David was one of the most visible and recognisable people in Potts Point, where we grew up. He would take us out walking with our family dog Blossom and his beloved Tosca. David knew everyone along Macleay Street and Darlinghurst Road, always greeting them with a kind word or a hilarious put-down. David loved street theatre, and he was good at it. Bobby, the big, broad-shouldered security guard who stood outside the old Westpac branch on Macleay Street, was a perfect foil for David. There was one scene with Bobby outside the Westpac ATM when David demanded that Bobby tell him where the Westpac Bank was. Bobby rubbed his head and pointed further down the street, telling David that it was in the next block. Back and forth, Bobby and David went. A confused person in the ATM queue intervened, only to be told by David to stay out of it. David then offered to sell my sister to the highest bidder, warning that he had no loose change. My sister Sylvie lives in London now and couldn't be here today, but after David's death, she wrote us a few lines, some of which I'm going to read out now. David was so special and loving towards me. He taught me a lot about courage and that it doesn't matter if you're a bit different to other people. In fact, it can often be a lot of fun. I will never forget him being Potts Point's Mr. Bumble, trying to sell me to passers-by on the street, offering baffled people ever more reasonable prices, and getting steadily more outraged when they wouldn't take me for such a good bargain. That's from Sylvie. Thank you, Sylvie. David would often scold us in public in front of concerned onlookers. He would say, "You wretched boy," or "You grubby, grubby little girl," and then order us to stand with our faces against the wall. We were always in on the joke and happily ran and stood with our faces against the wall. Everything was fun with David. Mostly we went about with David on foot. He was not a natural behind the wheel of a car. One of the few memories I have of him driving is not actually driving, but of us pushing the car together off the road when it had run out of petrol halfway up William Street. Another time, David drove me and Sylvie to the dentist at Linfield, and we got terribly lost on the way there. To be fair to David, he hadn't taken us to the dentist before this, and he was actively misdirected by my sister as to where to go. After that, whenever David took us to the dentist, it was by train. As everyone knows, until the recent introduction of the metro, all the trains in Sydney were the big double-decker style trains. When we got on the train with David, he said, "Why don't we go first class?" And he then proceeded to usher us up the steps to the top deck. My sister was 9 or 10 at this time and didn't have much experience with trains, but she was delighted that we were travelling first class. Once we were up on the top deck, David told us about all the different canapes and refreshments that would shortly be served. Thinking about it now, it's strange that we always had to get off the train before the refreshments had come around to where we were sitting. As we got older, David was always there for us. He was there with the spare key whenever we locked ourselves out, which for my sister happened embarrassingly often. And he was there whenever someone needed to be picked up from an appointment. David was especially close to our mum, Amanda. When Mum needed someone to collect her from hospital after a minor surgery a few years ago, David at once alarmed and delighted everyone in the hospital waiting area by announcing that he was Amanda Finlay's parole officer and that he was there to pick her up. David was one of my character referees when I was admitted to the legal profession about 8 years ago. He attended the ceremony at the Supreme Court along with Mum and Dad, and when we went back to the chambers where I'd secured a place as a junior barrister, we succeeded in passing David off as the former Chief Justice of New Zealand. PC, KCMG, etc. David was always very good at keeping a straight face, and my new colleagues in chambers were impressed by my connection to such an eminent legal figure. David might have enjoyed the pretend lofty title and post-nominals a little too much, because this began a period during which we would refer to him, and he would refer to himself variously as Lord Polson or even Cardinal Polson. David must have been manifesting, because what was originally a joke started to get real when he was awarded Australia Day honours in 2023 and became David Polson AM. David overcame many difficulties in his life. Despite all the problems of his health, he was, I always believed, fundamentally happy. He lived a fulfilling life and was absolutely adored by the people around him. Still, it is tremendously sad that he is no longer here, because we'll miss him. And there's so much more fun that we could have had together.
Thank you, Tom. One of David's greatest loves was music. His home was always filled with it. In particular, David loved the American-born Greek soprano Maria Callas, hailed as La Divina, the Divine One. In his last weeks in St Vincent's Hospital, her music was a constant companion, filling quiet moments with beauty and emotion. I think David would be very moved to know that the music of his favourite diva will be performed by one of Australia's most exquisite voices. Please welcome Clarissa Sparta to perform Sempre Libre from Verdi's opera La Traviata. That's certainly hard to follow. Thank you, Clarissa, for that magnificent tribute that we will long remember. Greg Fisher is the Chief Executive Officer of Qtopia Sydney. Greg will speak today on behalf of a community that includes a host of organisations: Bobby Goldsmith Foundation, Positive Life, ACON, and David's beloved Sisters of Charity. In doing so, he speaks not only at David's request as a friend, but as a collaborator in making real the shared vision of David and the late Professor David Cooper.
Thank you very much, Lou. And in thanking you, I also want to recognise you not just as the Master of Ceremonies, but as a good friend of David Polson, and also the conduit between the family and the wonderful work of the New South Wales Government in making everything happen today. So thank you, Lou. For David to have left as his dying wish that I would speak, should any gathering be held in his remembrance, is the greatest honour imaginable. We have heard that David participated in 28 drug trials, the advances from which have brought HIV/AIDS within our control. But as David would say often to me, "Greg, I was simply one cog in the wheel to make this happen. I was the human guinea pig." It was amazing, he would say when speaking about the height of the AIDS crisis. The medical fraternity, humanitarians, in particular the Sisters of Charity, about whom he spoke with boundless affection, the legal fraternity, politicians, community organisations, the pubs and clubs on Oxford Street, Mardi Gras, performers and everyone. They came together to find a solution and to be there for us. And that is what I always noticed about my friend David. He did not seek the spotlight, he sought solutions. David was an accidental community warrior who became a community hero. He never professed that the medical advances were all because of him. Rather, David would say that he chose to live. He chose to fight. He chose to participate in every possible trial to help test the latest medical hypothesis. David chose to trust. He trusted that the doctors would not kill him whilst imposing their latest trial through his body. David's trust led to a deep friendship and respect, in particular with David's relationship with his doctor, the late Professor David Cooper AO, was one of his most treasured. Their union of friendship, as well as doctor-patient, was the tonic David needed. David saw himself as a cog in the wheel to overcome HIV/AIDS. That selfless statement reflective of the man David was. His cog was not well paid. His cog didn't miss the torturous pain of the side effects of the trials he participated in. His cog did not avoid sharing Ward 17 South at St Vincent's Hospital with other patients whose screams of pain as their organs were gradually shutting down would haunt David forever. His cog did not permit him to ever form an intimate relationship for fear of passing his disease to a partner. His cog did not enable him to have an ongoing working life once he became sick. But far from ever feeling sorry for himself, David chose to be a beacon of hope wherever he could. No one ever had to ask David twice to participate in a drug trial. David would talk to anyone who would listen, not only about the tough, lonely, painful, frightening times, but just as importantly, as he would say, the good times. David told stories of laughter and cheer as drag queens would come to Ward 17 South to perform. Opera singers would come straight from the stage because they heard some patients loved their music. Community members dressed as bunnies delivering chocolates to the ward for Easter. Others brought vodka and ciggies to smoke in the hospital stairwells, much to the rolling eyes and smiles of the doctors and nurses on duty. Men in their final days would be taken in their wheelchairs, I even remember some in their beds, up to the Albury Hotel or to Taylor Square to watch the Mardi Gras parade. As the years went by and ultimately HIV/AIDS was much more under control, David's work moved to education and awareness. determined to eliminate shame associated with HIV. Nick Lawson, CEO of the Bobby Goldsmith Foundation, recounted to me, David was a giant in the HIV community. His bravery, advocacy and generosity in sharing his story have changed countless lives. He was not just a survivor, but a trailblazer. His loss is deeply felt here at BGF and in the wider community, but his legacy has forever shaped the future of HIV. Nick also recalled David's infectious smile, an attribute also recalled by Jane Costello, CEO of Positive Life. Jane said, "The abiding memory I have of David, apart from his 1,000-watt smile that would immediately light up any room he entered, was his extraordinary sense of determination and persistence." As Jane said to me, not only has he provided leadership through his founding of Qtopia Sydney, but he has also achieved outstanding success and made a significant contribution to the HIV sector and the community of people living with HIV, including around HIV prevention, support, advocacy, care, treatment and research. And it is Qtopia Sydney that was David's final punctuation mark. It was the entity that would bring everything in his life together. Gathering such luminaries as the Honourable Michael Kirby, ACCMG, and Ita Buttrose, AC OBE, both of them giants in their work in law, media and government response to AIDS, to be patrons, and then calling on a range of people to form a committee and then a board, Qtopia Sydney came to life. Sitting in the centre of Qtopia Sydney stands a memorial and a permanent HIV exhibition honouring the relationship between Professor Cooper and David, and is a reminder for all of how hard we fought, and importantly, what we fought for. Our history and our contribution to Australia in every aspect of society, our celebrations, our idiosyncrasies and peculiarities, our ambitions and hopes, our culture and our identity. My personal friendship with David was born out of our work to establish Qtopia Sydney and extended to our personal homes. Like many of us here, I will forever cherish the invites onto David's balcony for his famous chicken sandwiches and champagne, or gin and tonics, heavy on the gin with just a sniff of tonic. David lived in public housing. His modest apartment was filled with treasures from wonderful moments in his life. His many photos alone highlighting a truly colourful and very camp life. David's infectious smile that we all saw when bumping into him on the streets of Potts Point filled his home as well. David and I often conducted our meetings with a bowl of pasta and a glass of wine at Fratelli's. With the occasional stomp of his walking stick, the one you see up there in the photo, as the wine flowed, David always called for more. More exhibitions, more shows, more education, and in the same breath, always expressed such gratitude to me and to the whole Qtopia Sydney team, and especially the volunteers. He was humbled that so many people had willingly stepped up to make Qtopia Sydney all he hoped it would be and more. 10 days before David passed, he called me from the hospital, insistent that I pick him up so he could see the new exhibits that would be launched the following week. With one of my team, Scott, we collected David from the hospital and wheeled him around the exhibits. The thrill on his face I will never forget. The day before David died was the official opening of those exhibits. I was with him at the hospice and told him that that afternoon 200 people were coming to the opening. I reminded him of the hard work of the team and especially the volunteers to make it happen. David was in and out of consciousness. But he finally looked up at me and gave me the last smile I would ever see from him and whispered ever so softly, "Thank you." I pass his thanks to you all. David passed the next morning. The day I announced to the team that David had passed was the toughest day for all of us. Of course, we all knew that David was very unwell, but he was our inspiration. He was the person everyone knew had devoted his life for medical advancement and then for the establishment of Qtopia Sydney. amongst all the other community work he did. David will always be our inspiration. One of Qtopia's ambassadors and proud 78er, Mr. Rebel Barnes, recounted to me, "All of us had a deep affection for David. I first met David," he said, "in 1991, just after my then partner Jim Lowe died of AIDS. It was the same time I met Lord Mayor Clover Moore, Ita Buttrose, and so many other people who had such a major impact on Australia's response to the crisis." We at the 78ers loved and admired David. His tenacity in using his life's experiences to get Qtopia Sydney happening, to reclaim the former Darlinghurst police station from a place of horror for the 78ers, and to build such a community asset is an incredible legacy, so worthy of this state memorial. I agree with you, Rebel. Friends, to have a state memorial is an honour, the first time this has been bestowed on a queer advocate, and I thank the state sincerely. In a world that is fast seeing hard-fought wins for equality and tolerance whisked away with the stroke of a pen in other jurisdictions, our fight, David's long fight, must not be in vain. Some people may not have heard of David Polson, though the massive outpouring of grief from the community and its organisations would suggest otherwise. But just as his life caused people to come together in love and gratitude, so too is his death. If people query who was David, if they see the lowered flags in David's honour today around the city or on the Harbour Bridge, and if they query why and they learn about David, they will learn about love, respect, gratitude, selflessness, and community services in a way very few people could teach. And that is what true legacy looks like. To David's sister Ruth Henning, and to all your family, as well as close friends Peter Campbell, Amanda Findlay, Greg Woods, Tom Woods, and your sister over in London, Colin Chin, Paul Denham, and Louise Duff, and to all of us, I extend the deepest of condolences. And I extend our thanks to you for sharing a man whose life achieved more than most because of his refusal to accept complacency and limitations. To my dear friend David, thank you for the honour of being your founding CEO of something that meant so much to you, Qtopia Sydney. Moreover, I thank you for being my mentor and my beautiful friend. I love you and I miss you terribly. Rest in peace, David. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. It's my pleasure to introduce the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Chris Minns, with a reading from For Good from the musical Wicked.
I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn. And we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them. And we help them in return. I don't know if I believe that's true, but we know we are who we are today because we knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes a sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood, who can say if we've been changed for the better, but because we knew you, we have been changed for good. It may well be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of us is made of what we learned from you. You'll be with us like a handprint on our hearts. And now, whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten ours by being a friend.
Thank you, Premier. Our speakers today have shared treasured memories of David and given us insight into his spirit, his passion, his commitment, and certainly his resilience. David's family and friends would now like to share a snapshot of some of their fondest memories, accompanied by a further musical selection from David himself, the Prelude to Cavalleria Rusticana, an opera by Pietro Casciani, a piece of music that weaves a delicate yet powerful tapestry of emotion, capturing the raw intensity of love, betrayal and passion. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us to honour the life of David Polson. I know some of you will be watching with a wry smile at the thought of David, ever the thespian, stage managing his service. The selection of music, who would speak and when, but the truth is that David thought he was organising those details for a small gathering of family and friends. Never would he have imagined that his selfless approach to his life in warding off death for as long as possible would be rewarded with the magnificent honour that is today. David would have said that it was his dear friend Professor Cooper, Sister Claire and the beautiful Sisters of Charity, the magnificent people of the Kirby Institute and St Vincent's Hospital that deserve the accolades. But on this occasion he was wrong. And I think he would have been most chuffed at our Premier magnanimously agreeing to read the words from the Broadway musical called Wicked. Please remain in your seats for the departure of the immediate family and dignitaries. As you wait, enjoy David's final musical offering, The Best of Times from La Cage aux Folles, and permit me to steal a line or two and share them on behalf of David. So hold this moment fast and live and love as hard as you know how, and make this moment last, because the best of times is now. Thank you for joining us.
The best of times is now. What's left of summer but a faded rose? The best of times is now. As for tomorrow, well, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? So hold this lonely face and live and love as hard as you know how, and make this moment last, because the best of times is now, is now, is now, now. At some forgotten yesterday, now tomorrow is too far away. So hold this moment fast and live and love as hard as you know how, and make this moment last, because the best of times is now, is now, is now. The best of times is now. What's left of summer but a faded rose? The best of times is now. As for tomorrow, well, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? So hold this moment fast and love as hard and fast as you know how, and make this moment last, because the best of times is now, is now, is now, now. That soon forgotten yesterday, now tomorrow is too far away. So hold this moment fast and live and love as hard as you know how. the best of times is now, is now, is now.